Begin the current Daf Mesechtes קידושין. We begin on Daf Lamed Zayin. We begin on the bottom of Lamed Vav and Beis, 3 lines up at the bottom of the Amid, where we continue to look at the next Mishnah, continuing on a similar theme from the previous Mishnah regarding the qualifications of a mitzvah and the exceptions of that. As we spoke about, the last thing we really spoke about was we spoke about women, and we spoke about mitzvahs as Mangrama and Loyas Mangrama. We spoke about mitzvahs Loyas. We said, okay, they're obligated in all of them. Chutz, mi Baltakiv, Baltashkiv, Baltamalamesim. And this Mishnah continues a similar theme. Also talks about a halachic categorization of mitzvahs and also the exception to that rule. So discussing today's daf are called mitzvah shitluy ba'aretz. Any mitzvah that's dependent on agriculture on the ground. So in Haggis Ela ba'aretz only applies in Eretz Yisrael. She'ein tluy ba'aretz is not dependent in the land. The Haggis ben ba'aretz ben mechutz la'aretz that applies in all different places. So important terms and concepts that the Mishnah discusses is arla, which is a fruit tree in its first 3 years that its fruits are forbidden to eat, to have any benefit from it. Climb is when you plant a forbidden mixture of different types of species together. Chadash is when you plant a new grain, if it took root after, it has to wait till after the omer is brought for it to be permitted to be eaten. Be a Moshe, there are certain psukim that mention about coming into Eretz Yisrael and about the settlements. So there's a discussion in the Gemara, big machlekes in regards to different specifications. Does it teach b'chal makom shatam yeshvim? Like when you come in, so Moshe is going to be wherever you are, or la'achi Yerusha v'shiva mashma is come and say when you come in, and then when you settle, because it actually took 14 years for them to conquer and then divide Eretz Yisrael. So what does it actually mean when it says Moshe v'seichem and it says kisavoyu? When it says these two terms, what's it coming to teach us? And the Gemara will show how this is based on the machlekes regarding niskei yachid, regarding when an individual was bringing a carbon, when he brings, does he bring the sachim, depending in the midbar, on the bamas yachid, the bamas tzibur. The Gemara is going to show how that would be a machlekes dependent on the same idea of how to translate bia and Moshe. So begin the current daf of Lamed Zayin on the bottom of Lamed Vav and Beis, 3 lines up at the bottom of the Amid. Says the Mishnah, call mitzvah shitluy ba'aretz. Any mitzvah that's dependent on the land, in the Haggis Ela ba'aretz only applies in the Aretz, meaning in Eretz Yisrael. She'ein tluy ba'aretz, if it's not dependent on the land, the Haggis ben ba'aretz ben mechutz la'aretz, it applies whether in Eretz Yisrael or in chutz la'aretz. And the Gemara is going to explain what does it mean if it's talui ba'aretz. What does it mean it's dependent on the land? Now that's the general rule. But as the Mishnah continues on top of Lamed Zayin and Aleph, but chutz, there's some exceptions. Tanakama says chutz min ha'orla v'klayim, except for the fruit tree in its first 3 years and the forbidden mixture of different grains, where even though it's dependent on the land, it's agriculture, but it applies even in chutz la'aretz. Why? Rashi says orla is halacha Moshe Messina that it does, and klayim is from rabbinic halacha, as the Gemara is going to tell us on the next daf, on Daf Lamed Ches Amud Beis, where Taisa actually has a conversation about why didn't we mention other things also, like for example challah. Why don't we say that also applies in which he brings a question from the Yerushalmi. So Yerushalmi answers because actually challah does not apply by a non-Jew. When the non-Jew makes dough, it doesn't write. You don't find on the Duncan Hines or whatever one of these things challah is genimin. They don't have this on the entemins or whatever, the shzuknish, because they don't have a chiyuv of challah. And our Mishnah is only talking about things that apply by Yidden and by non-Jews. It's actually based on that. Later on, Taisa asks, he says, really, so if Arla applies by, that we're saying it's a chutz la'aretz also, and applies also by the non-Jews, he says, how do we buy from the non-Jews the fruits? How are we buying from them? But you tell me Arla applies even to the Goyim. So, interestingly, Taisa brings from... he says that they asked, he says from Rabbeinu Shimshon, although in the bottom of Taisus, said he asked the Oivdei Adama, he asked the farmers, and they said they don't cut the branch from although they do, they're being mavriach, they constantly are grafting, whatever, but they don't cut it off, so it's still nurturing from the old tree. And the Mishnah teaches that if it's still nurturing from the old tree, it's going to be potter from Arla. But then Taisus says, how do you know if it was cut off or not? If it's a new tree, it would be a problem about Arla. You wouldn't be able to buy from the non-Jew. This is an interesting simon from the Yerushalmi, which it's a moral lesson too. It says that the Haiman the Ochel Michavre, someone that eats from his friend, meaning he gets from his friend, Bohis Listakulibe, he's embarrassed to look at him. So what happens is that when it's nurturing from the old tree, the branches actually turn the other way. When it doesn't nurture from the old tree, then it turns towards the old tree. So they say that's the lesson from the Yerushalmi, that you see that if a person gets him, somebody's embarrassed to look at him, he kicked the under the veg. He doesn't want that, he's embarrassed to look at him. That's how you could tell if the tree that was grafted is disconnected or connected. If it's still connected, still nurturing, it's going to be turning the other way. If it's disconnected, he has no problem. He looks back to where he comes from. Al-Kapanim, then you can know if it's oral or not. But that's what this mission is talking about, according to the Yerushalmi, specifically things that apply by also non-Jews. So although everything that applies regarding agriculture applies in Eretz Yisrael, there's two exceptions. Orla and Klayim apply even in Chutz La'aretz. What? Right, so that's what Taisa asks. He says, okay, so what are you going to say? You're going to say that's good for what Taisa says. He says, so Taisa says, Ol Shaila, why didn't they also say Truma and Ma'aser? That also applies in Chutz La'aretz. So Taisa says, what are you going to say? Truma is only Midrabanan in the Chutz La'aretz. So he says, Bechal is also only Midrabanan in the Chutz La'aretz. And still we said it, so why don't you say the Taisa use it in... Right, but then why didn't they say Truma and Ma'aser? I mean, oh no, so what? No, you're right. That's the good shaila in the Yerushalmi, but Yerushalmi doesn't say that. Exactly. You could technically say that, but Yerushalmi doesn't say that. Yerushalmi says that's only because it's naig b'yisol levi kachavim. So then, according to the Yerushalmi, in the Chami, if you don't hold like the Yerushalmi, that you could say that. It's your Rabban. But according to Yerushalmi, that didn't say that. So then, why didn't you say Trumas and Ma'aser also? Then it says a whole shtickle Torah about Trumas and Ma'aser is different. It only plays Ayar Sasmuchas L'Eretz Yisrael. So then the Mishnah says that Rebbe Elazar Omer, he says Af HaChadosh. Also, the new grain that you're not allowed to eat it before the carbon urban was brought. That also. The Gemara is going to explain exactly what does that mean. That also. First, the Gemara explains the words of our Mishnah. My tluya, my sheina tluya. What does it mean? Mitzvahs that are totally ba'aretz, and what does it mean? Mitzvahs that are not totally, not dependent on the earth. So we translate it one way, but the Gemara sounds like as follows. The Gemara wants to entertain. If you think mitzvahs say dependent on the earth, meaning in Eretz Yisrael, certain mitzvahs it talks about when you're going to come to Eretz Yisrael, like it says in Mikra Yotes Kisavayu and Shemais Gimel Kiyaviyacha. So what does it mean? It's totally ba'aretz. Well, it's totally in our coming into Eretz Yisrael. And when it means it's not totally in the Eretz, means the like kasav biyah doesn't say about coming into Eretz Yisrael. That's what would be in Eretz Yisrael or in Chutz La'aretz. Also depends if it's totally ba'aretz. If it means when you're going to come in, how could that be? But you've about a tefillin, the mitzvah of wearing tefillin, upet chamor, decapitating the firstborn donkey that you have to give it to the kohen. The chsib ben biyam, as Rashi brings, it says vay kiviyacha in Parsha Kadishli. We say in our parsha when we put on tefillin all the time, we say this. And b'nahegen ben ba'aretz ben b'chutz la'aretz, and they apply both in Eretz Yisrael and the chutz la'aretz, which, as Rashi brings, discusses that tefillin we find many places throughout Shas, the Gemara Menachos, Avlam Hey, that the Rabbanan, the Amiram and Bavel were wearing tefillin, and Petach Hamor also we find. So if that's the case, so but I thought it says Kavai Kibiyacha, and you told me when it's totally ba'aretz, it's only in Eretz Yisrael. Why do we wear tefillin even chutz la'aretz? And I remember Yehuda says no hachikama. How you translate the Mishnah is anything that's an obligation on the person's body, meaning it's not totally ba'aretz, it's not dependent on the land in Eretz Yisrael. It's nothing to do with the land at all. It's not about something that grows in the ground. It's on the person's body. For example, Shabbos and tefillin and idolatry and petach hamor and bris milah and arayis and all those types of things. They're chayvas aguf. There's something with the person's body. You could be on the moon. It doesn't make it where you are. No, moon you have to know what Shabbos, but wherever you are, you would have the same halacha. So that's nahegis ben ba'aretz ben b'chutz la'aretz. That's going to apply whether in Eretz Yisrael and chutz la'aretz. Chayvas karka, something that's imposed upon the ground or what nurtures from the ground. For example, trumis and maestris and challah and leket and shikha and peya and shmita and chadash and arla and klayim. All these things are things that are agriculture. Ein nahagis el ba'aretz. They only apply in Eretz Yisrael. That's how you have to translate the halacha of the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, from where do we know this from? That a chayvas haguf, something that's dependent on the person's body that as an obligation applies wherever a person is, yet chayvas hakarka, things relating to farming, are only going to be in Eretz Yisrael. That's totally ba'aretz. The Tarma in the Brisa. Pasuk says in Devarim and Perikut Beis Pasuk Aleph, it says in the entirety, the Pasuk says, Eila chuke b'mishpatim, these are the statutes and the judgments, asher tishman and lasses ba'aretz, that you're going to safeguard to do in the land, asher nosla shemakei avesech alach, l'rishto, kol hayamim, asher admechayim al adam, that you live on the land. So now the Brisa expounds this Pasuk in detail. Eila chukim, these are the statutes, Eila midrashas. This refers to the expositions of the psukim in the drush. V'mishpatim, and the judgments, Eladinim, this is judgment, this is justice, this is the courts. Asher tishmerun, that you should safeguard, zu Mishnah. Says Rashi, why is Mishnah tishmerun? Because if the Mishnah brings to action, and action, it says in the pasuk, tishmerun lasais. So if it says you should safeguard to do, Mishnah is something that if you learn it, it helps you do. So therefore that's tishmerun. Lasa is to actually do. Zumaisa, that means the action. This should be ba'aretz, in the land. Okay, so it says in the land. So based on that part of the pasuk, Yochel kol hamitzvos kun lo yihul noigin el ba'aretz. If all we had in the pasuk was the word ba'aretz, I would think that, okay, all the mitzvahs, like we said, the medrash and the mikra, all these different things, the mishpatim only apply in Eretz Yisrael. Tamalim, read the end of the pasuk. It says, kol hayamim asher atem chayim al adam, all the days that you live on the earth. That doesn't say ba'aretz, it's adama, and it's that you live. That's both in Eretz Yisrael or chutz la'aretz. Okay, now, ikal hayam, if I only had the end of the pasuk of kol hayam, all the days that you live, yachal yinagin bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz, I would think that, okay, the mitzvah apply whether in Eretz Yisrael or chutz la'aretz. Well, tamlam ba'aretz, but it says in the land. Okay, so it says the Bryce like this. Since the pasuk is including and excluding, ba'aretz is saying it's only in Eretz Yisrael. Ashatim chayim is including wherever you are. So Tzei Lamad, go on and learn on which one of them the pasuk is saying Kol hayam achayim al adama, that applies everywhere. Mimasha Amar be'inyan, this that it says near that the next pasuk after that. What's the next pasuk coming to teach us? It says you should totally destroy all the places that the idol worshippers made, meaning avodah zarah. And that is included wherever you live, because it says Kol hayam ashatem chayim. And that's what's called the Dava Lama Minyane. So we have the Yud Gimel Midrash Atay Nujash, and we say everything among Rabbi Shmuel Aimer, the cue for the Oval to say his Kaddish. But there's certain things that we know. Shava, Kavachayma, one of them is called Dava Lama Minyane. Something that's learned out from the context. Which, from here we learn out that it says the last thing before this pasuk was Kol Yom Ashat L'Chaim Al Adam. And the next pasuk talks about Avodah Zarah. From here you learn out all the chayvus aguf that applies even to chutzlars, because ma'avayis kachavim. What do we find by idolatry? This is distinct chayvus aguf, nothing to do with the ground. It's something you could do on a plane too. It's something that's dependent on the person's body himself. And v'nahegis bein ba'aretz bein chutzlars, because it's going on right after the pasuk of kol yimashad l'chaim al adamo. So afkol chayvus aguf, anything that's also dependent on the person himself, nahegis bein ba'aretz bein chutzlars applies both in Eretz Yisrael and the chutzas. That's the source that the chayvus haguf is everywhere. And then the inference is, what's ba'aretz is those that are totally ba'aretz, of those things are going to apply only in Eretz Yisrael. Now, the Tanna Kama said, okay, that's the rule, but there's two exceptions. Chutz min ha'arlo, except for the fruits of a tree in its first 3 years, v'aklayim, and the forbidden mixture of different species. Those things are going to be even the chutzlars. Then there are some words added on in some printings. Rebbe Lezer, which are the words of a Mishnah, he says afa chadash. He says also the new grain, that it's forbidden before the Omer being brought the second day of Pesach. Now, Iboilu had the following question: Rebbe Lezer, l'kula palig or l'churma palig? Was he disagreeing to be lenient or to be stringent? Now, most people probably read it one way, but the Gemara has it as a question. L'churma palig, do we say he was disagreeing to be stringent? This is what the Tanna Kama was saying. Tanna Kama said like this: if it's tali ba'aretz, if it's agricultural, it only applies in Eretz Yisrael. Chutz min ha'arlo min ha'klayim. Except for those two, they're going to be even the chutz lagas. Why? It's halacha Moshe Sinai. Although you could say that it's a obligation of the ground, in spite of that, halacha Moshe Sinai says it's going to be even the chutzlah that's in your backyard in the diaspora. Now, of Chodesh, but obviously from not mentioning Chodesh, the Tanakhama is saying, of a Chodesh ba'aretzim b'chutz la'atzloi. But the prohibition about eating the new grain is only a problem if it grows in Eretz Yisrael, not a chutzlas. Now, Rashi's bothered. He says, wait a second. It says by the pasuk of new grain, it says, mi moishvei seichem, from your settled places. It says at the end of Alechem B'koli V'charmel. So he says, that's not to say, as we're going to see shortly, that the word moishvei seichem usually comes to include b'chamokim shatam yeshim, wherever you live. It's not going to be in New Jersey. Why not? It says mi moishvei seichem. So that's just l'chayr be b'chamokim shatam yeshim. Why are we saying Chodesh is not going to be everywhere? It's only going to be in Eretz Yisrael. No, actually, what's coming to teach us is that even in Eretz Yisrael, they weren't obligated the 14 years that they were in this place called Gilgal, which they had conquered and they divided until they finally settled. Moishvei Sechem, of course, to be from the word Moishav of Shenis Yashvu. Only when they settled it and everyone recognized his own property, that's when the Isra of Chodesh started taking effect. That's the one from Moishvei Sechem. As the Gemara says, my time, what's the reason why that Chodesh is only going to be in Eretz Yisrael? Because Moishav means, in this context, not B'chamakam Shatam Yeshvim. It means La'acha Yerusha V'Yeshiva Mash. Means after they finally inherited and settled the land, that's when the Isra of Chodesh applied. But it's only going to be in Eretz Yisrael. It's not going to be also in Chutz La'aretz like Arla and Klein. That's the Tanakhama. But us, Rabbi Lazar, maybe not Rabbi Lazar was coming to say, and this is option number one of what does Rabbi Lazar mean to say. And he was coming to say, no. Av Chodesh noig bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. He was going l'chumra. He was saying that also the prohibition about the new grain would be not only what grows in Eretz Yisrael, but even what grows in chutz la'aretz. My time, what's the reason? Because he darshans the word Moishav differently. Moishav Seichem means b'chamakim shatam yeshim. Moishav Seichem means your settled areas, wherever you settle. Even you settle in the Americas, wherever it's going to be, it's going to have the Isser of Chodesh. That's one option. Option number two is a different way. Maybe he's disagreeing leniently. How so? So you have to read the words differently. Tanakhama was saying like this. Tanakhama said, if it's agriculture, it only applies in Eretz Yisrael, chutzim in the Arla Ba'Klayim. Except for Arla and Klayim, because the Hilchas of Gemir, let's Allah say now that they apply, even the chutz starts. The kol sheken, these words are going to be different in the Tanakhama. The kol sheken chadash, and for sure, the new grain, which the pasuk says the word moishavos. Said moishav seichem. The moishav means kol mokum shatam yeshim mashma. So we're learning in Tanakhama, who doesn't mention Chodesh. We're not sure. In the first option, we're saying, okay, it doesn't mention it. He holds it's only Eretz Yisrael. Second option is that no, Tanakhama holds for sure Chodesh is going to be in Chutz La'aretz because it says moishav seichem, which means wherever you live. It means even the Chutz La'aretz. Oh, that's Rabbi Lazar coming to say that no, Chodesh is, when he says Af HaChodesh, what's Af HaChodesh going on? He's saying that Chodesh is also a mitzvah satluyis ba'aretz, and that Chodesh ain't a noig el ba'aretz. That Chodesh is only in Eretz Yisrael. Because the Moishav is, how do you translate Moishav Seichem? La'achi Yerusha V'Yeshiva Mashma. It means, doesn't mean B'chamakam Shadu Yeshim. It means after you inherit, after you settle the land, took a while till they settled the land, then Isra Chodesh started applying. My af. So what does Rabbi Lazar mean when he says af? We read it, most people probably read it, Chutz Ma'av Klayim. Well, it says af HaChodesh. No, it's going akamaisa. It's not going on the chutz. It's going on the klal of the Tanakhama. Tanakhama said kol mitzat luis ba'aretz, anoheges only in ba'aretz. That Rabbi Lazar says, oh, there's one more. That's also going to be told about Aretz. It's also Chodesh. I mean, not like the Tanakhama, although he doesn't mention it, held that a Kol Shkein Chodesh is going to be in Chutz La'aretz. And Lazar disagrees, says, no, L'Kula, Chodesh does not apply in Chutz La'aretz. Chodesh is only a problem in Eretz Yisrael. So how do you translate what Rabbi Lazar is saying? So that says, the Gemara Tosh Matzvinga Raya. Because the Amar Abai is a little bit complex, but it's a little bit tedious. But from here, what the Amar Abaya, we're going to prove what it is that Rabbi Lazar was coming to say. Why? Because Abai said like this. He says, "Man Tana, who is the Tana Kama of our Mishnah? The polyglot Rabbi Elazar." In other words, we're going to infer from what Abai said what the Tana Kama is saying, and then we'll understand what Rabbi Elazar is saying to know if he's lechumra polyg or lekula polyg. Because he said, "Who is the Tana Kama?" It doesn't say who the Tana. He said, "I'll tell you the Tana Kama," says Abai, that disagrees with Rabbi Elazar. It's Rabbi Shmuel. What does it mean, Rabbi Shmuel? Again, there's a little bit hot cup with these Rashis and the Gemara on the more technical point. Rabbi Shmuel, as we're going to shortly say, he learns that the word Moishav, Moishvei means after they inherited and then they settled the land. Now, that means to say, Moishvei Seichem is not teaching you B'chol Makom Shatim Yeshvim. He learns Moishvei Seichem means Acha Yerusha V'Yeshiva. So you don't have any ribui to say it means wherever they live. That means to say Chadash only applies in Eretz Yisrael. Now,
they were in Yarden before they went. Shiur took them into Eretz Yisrael. None of Hilchos Arts was no Yarden.
Right, exactly. That's what they're saying. La'acha Yerusha B'Yeshiva. Only after they inherited, it took 7 years to conquer Eretz Yisrael and 7 years to then divide it. And only after that, each guy recognized his own portion. Only then did this halacha apply. Now, Rabbi Elazar is coming to say then, when he says Afa Chadash, must be, what was he saying? That must be that it's also like Orel and Klaim, that it's B'chol Moishvei Seichem. Because if Abai is saying the Tana Kama is Rabbi Shmuel, who holds Moishvei Seichem is La'acha Yerusha B'Yeshiva, not B'chol Makom Shatim Yeshvim. That means to say it only applies in Eretz Yisrael, because you don't have a riboy for all places. So if Rabbi Elazar is disagreeing with that Tana Kama, he must say that no, Av Chadash is also from those things that apply in Chutz La'aretz, and he's lechurma polig. He's being more stringent. He's saying that you cannot have your new bagel, whatever it is, until you make sure Yashan, make sure that even in New Jersey, you make sure that they got the grain from the old grain, because it's Av Chadash also applies in Chutz La'aretz. What's this Raya? What's this Rabbi Shmuel that Abai is saying is a Tana Kama disagrees with Rabbi Elazar? The time like learn the Brisa. Now, what's the context of this Brisa? The Brisa is talking about a parsha of Nesachim, where it was libations. They would pour certain things when they brought karbanas, oil, flour. They would pour certain things when they brought a carbon. And this is brought in Parshas Lech and Shlach. It says, "Kisubayu eretz moishvei seichem." When you're going to come to the land of your settled place, and you're going to make a ishul Hashem, a fire offering for Hashem. So it talks about bringing the sach. Rabbi Shmuel learns in Mesechta Zvachim Daf Kofir Alpha and Aleph from a pasuk that the pasuk is only coming to, and this again, these are finer points. You want to halt up a little bit. There's Rashi in the medium-sized lines, the first line, only to require nesachim, the libations for a bama sibur. What's a bama sibur? Bama sibur was when there was no Beis Hamikdash. There was still like a Mishkan. There was like Shiloh and Gilgal. These places that they had like a somewhat of a temple, but it wasn't a Beis Hamikdash. So there was this public altar. That's a bama sibur. It's only coming to requiring the zachem for a public bama and not for an individual. At certain times in history, people were able to have their own private in your backyard. You got your own mizbeach. Kinlech, we're going to do some shwama. We're doing them a mizbeach. They would go out and had this bama and they brought a carbon to Hashem. So Rabbi Shmuel says that the pasuk is only coming to requiring the zachem for a bama sibur, not for bama yachar. And he learns out from the pasuk that says, "Asher ani noisein lochem," that I'm going to give to you. Lochem is plural, not lecha, but lochem, which is teaching you by a bama that applies by all of you, the pasuk is talking about. So therefore, obviously, that means to say like this. When it says Moishvei Seichem, it cannot mean Kam Makom Shatim Yeshim. Again, there's mamash a halt kap cheshbon over here. Yishmael cannot learn Moishvei Seichem Makom Shatim Yeshim. Why? Because a bama sibur is not wherever you are. It's only in one place. So you cannot darshan Moishvei Seichem Makom Shatim Yeshim when it talks about the Nesachim. So obviously, Moshe, that it says in the pasuk, is coming to tell us that even when the Bama was in Gilgal, where there was a Mizbeach HaNachoshes for the 14 years that they conquered and divided Eretz Yisrael, which is a Bama Sibur, that they were not obligated in the Sachim in that time. That's what Moshe is coming to teach you. But when they came to Shiloh, which is after they inherited and settled the land, then it became obligated in the Sachim. And then it never stopped being that Nesachim were brought from a Bama Tzibur, from a public Bama, even after Shiloh was destroyed, and the Bama Tzibur was in Noivin Giving. That's what is saying that La Lamedcha, this is what the Brisa teaches, as the Gemara quotes. La Lamedcha, the teachers, Chamakim Shenem by Moishav, whenever it says Moishav, Ein El Acha Yerusha V'Yeshiva Devei B'Shmal. It's coming to teach you after they inherited and settled the land. In other words, from the fact that the pasuk is telling you by a bama that applies to all of you, it says lochem in the plural. Obviously, the Moshav that's written by Nesachim cannot mean kol makom, because if that would be the case, it would be wherever you are in your backyard. It would be a bamas yachid, which is done in all places at a time when bamas are permitted. So Rabbi Shmuel, you cannot say that because it says lachem, which in the plural, and the Nesachim is teaching a bamas sibur, and the Moshavei Seichem cannot mean b'chavakum shat Moshavim. Has to be lacha Yerusha b'yeshiva, and therefore again. You see from Rabbi Shmuel, if he's the Tana Kama of our Mishnah, that he's saying that Chodosh is not included because whenever it says Moshvei Seichem, it means La'achar Reyusha B'Yeshiva, says Rabbi Shmuel. He's saying in the context of Nesachim. But he's saying wherever it says it, you see from here, Moshvei Seichem doesn't mean B'chamakim because it can't mean that over here. Oh, so then by Chodosh, the new grain, when it also says Moshvei Seichem, must mean also la'acha Yerush b'yeshiva, and not b'chamakim shad miyeshvim. So that means to say it's only in Eretz Yisrael. Oh, Rebbe Laz is disagreeing with the Tanna Kama. He must be saying no. Moshe V'Seichem means b'chamakim shad miyeshvim, and therefore Afa Chodesh is l'chumra polik, which is going to be even in Chutz La'aretz. That's Rabbi Shmuel. Okay, that's really the end of the proof of the Gemara from Abayi's teaching that you see Rebbe Laz was l'chumra polik. But the Brisa continues. Amar Rebbe Kiva. Rebbe Kiva says to Rabbi Shmuel, he says, wait a second. He says, Harei Shabbos. By Shabbos, it says, well, Machlik is Rashi and Tosafos, which pasuk Rashi brings Leisavaru Eish, Tosafos brings a different pasuk, but it says by Shabbos, never by my Shabbos. It says my Shabbos, and when the heg is bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz la'aretz. If that's the case, as Rashi explains, Rabbi Kiva is asking back on Rabbi Shmuel. Wait a second, didn't you tell me that Moshe Seichem does not mean wherever you are? It only means b'chamakim. It only means Acha Yerusha Yeshiva. Shabbos, it says Moshe Seichem, and it's going to be. Even the Chutz La'aretz. So now I can tell you, Moshe V'Seichem by Nesachim also is wherever you are. And therefore, as Rashi explains, Rabbi Kiva disagrees fundamentally with Rabbi Shmuel. And he says that no, we're talking about by a Bamas Yachid that applies B'chol Moshe V'Seichem, wherever you live. This, that it makes it dependent on coming into Eretz Yisrael. In other words, what it's coming to say is that up until now you were in the Mishkan where the Bamas were forbidden, and you didn't yet be makriv in Nesachim, but if it was on the Bama Sibur, when you come to Eretz Yisrael, all the 14 years where the Mishkan Shiloh was not established yet, and it was in Gilgal, and they were busy with wartime, which we know at those times they're able to have their own private Bamas, the pasuk is coming to teach us, Ki sivoyu ala aretz. When you're going to come to Eretz Yisrael, and the Bamas Yachid is going to be permitted, it also is going to require Nesachim, as this is how the Gemara explains in Zvachim. Rabbi Kiva disagrees with Rabbi Shmuel and holds that no, that Moshe Seichem is b'chamakom shat miyeshvim, and the Nesachim is not talking about by Nesachim of the Tzibur. It doesn't hold lachem means it's for Bamas Tzibur. That's how Rabbi Shmuel learns, and that's why Tosafos explains on Amud Beis in a second. That's why the Gemara asks, why does Rabbi Kiva learn Rabbi Shmuel? Shmuel doesn't learn Rabbi Kiva because he learns lachem. It says it has to be Nesachim of a Bamas Tzibur. It says lachem in the plural. Kiva doesn't hold to that drasha of Lechem, and therefore he says, no, it's talking about Bamas Yachid, talking about Nesachim of an individual, and you can do whatever you want. And what's the pasuk? If it's the Bamas Yachid, it's not Eretz Yisrael. No, when you came to Eretz Yisrael, and there was no more Mishkan Shiloh, and then you were in Gilgal, and you're fighting the war, and then everyone was able to do their own Bamas Yachid, that's what saying that you can require Nesachim on your own private Bama. And therefore he disagrees. As you see by Shabbos and Moshe V'Seichem, it's also Chutz La'aretz. Therefore, Nesachim also could be in Chutz La'aretz. It could be wherever. B'chol makom shad yeshim. On that, Amalei, Rabbi Shmuel responds back. He says, Shabbos? Don't mean we write from Shabbos. Shabbos kavachayma asir. Shabbos, the reason why it's wherever you live is from a kavachayma. Ma mitzvahs kalas, if the easy mitzvahs naigis ben ba'aretz ben b'chutz applies both in Eretz and Chutz La'aretz. Shabbos chamich le'kolshkin. So you're right. It says Moshe V'Seichem there. Maybe shemid la'achar yusha b'yeshiva, but from a kavachayma, I'll tell you Shabbos applies even in the Chutz La'aretz. Now that's the end. But the Gemara concludes and says, like we mentioned before, but the fact that Abai says, who's the son of this Rabbi Lazar? Is Rabbi Shmuel, who said that Moshe Seichem teaches you la'acha Yerusha b'yeshiva. It's only after you inherit and settle Eretz Yisrael. Shema Minor, Rabbi Elazar disagrees with the Tanna Kama, and if the Tanna Kama is Rabbi Shmuel, obviously that he's saying l'chumra polig. That he's saying that no, Moshe V'seichem is b'chol makom shat yeshem, even the chutz lords. Shema Minor. That obviously when it says ahachadosh, ahachadosh what? On the second half of the statement, not the first half of the statement. It's saying that's just like Orl and Klaim, that's going to apply also in chutz lords. Now the Gemara wants to brought in the Brisa because I want to explain how we translate Rabbi Elazar. And the way to do that was we had to show that Abaye said that Tanna Kama is Rabbi Shmuel. From Abaye's teaching, we infer that Rabbi Elazar holds that it's l'chumra polig. But says the Gemara now on the Brisa. Let's see. Rabbi Shmuel ahecha koi. Rabbi Shmuel, when he's bringing his raya that he's going to tell you a klal gadol, whenever it says Moshe V'seichem, what does it mean? It means b'chamakim shat miyoshvim, because he says, aha, I have a pasuk. It says Moshe V'seichem. I prove to you that it means lach Yerusha b'yeshiva, because it cannot mean b'chamakim shat miyoshvim. Because it says lochem in the plural, which is bama sibur, which is not wherever you live. It's only specific places. So where is he going on? He's going on the sachem. That's his raya. That's where he's getting this whole source from. It says the Gemara ben Sachem when they're talking about the libations we contain them in bays. The problem is it says both coming into Eretz Yisrael and about settling the land of Eretz Yisrael. The pasuk says Dabel b'nei Yisrael v'matlam ki savayu el eretz Moshe V'seichem. So the question is, as the Rashi explains the Gemara's question, how could Rabbi Shmuel learn out from this halacha of Nesachim that wherever it says the word Moshe means la'achi Yerusha b'yeshiva, but that's when it says Bia and Moshe. It talks about coming to Eretz Yisrael. So l'chayr would mean coming to Eretz Yisrael and yarshening and settling and okay la'achi Yerusha b'yeshiva. But how could you learn to a place that only says Moshe V'seichem? Like let's say what our Gemara is trying to compare it to the halacha of Chadash, and if it doesn't say Bia, maybe this that we're explaining that it's where it says Kisavayu, that means you're coming to Eretz Yisrael, but maybe that's where you're going to say that it's only going to be La'acher Yerusha b'yeshiva. But Moshe, let's say it says just Moshe, we're not Bia. I can tell you that can be even Chutz La'aretz. So the Gemara says you're right. Hachikama. Rabbi Shmuel was saying L'lam becomes a teacher Shekamokim B'Shem Bia U'Moshe. You're right. He wasn't saying wherever just says Moshe V'seichem. He's saying wherever it says coming in and Moshe V'seichem in Elach Yerusha V'Shiva Rabbi Shmuel. It's only after you inherit and that you settle it. And as Rashi points out, like Abaye had said, that he's the Tanna Kama of our Mishnah regarding Chodesh. That Chodesh also says Bias Haaretz and Moshavos. So when he's saying Kol Makom, what's the Kol Makom? How many times in the Torah does it say? It says many times Moshe V'seichem. How many times does it say Bias Haaretz and Moshavos? Another place. Chodesh. Chodesh also says these two terms. And just like over here, I proved to you from the Sachim, it's only Acha Yerusha b'yeshiva. That's how you translate Moshe V'seichem, because it cannot mean B'chal Makom Shal Yeshiva, because it's in the plural. It's a Bama Sibur, can't be wherever you are. Chodesh also when it says Moshe V'seichem then, and Bia is also going to mean Acha Yerusha b'yeshiva, which is only in Eretz Yisrael. And that's what I said. Rabbi Elazar, who's disagreeing, is saying no. In the Chutzards B'chal Makom Shal Yeshiva. So the Gemara says, wait a second. If that's the case, that's how you translate Rabbi Shmuel. So when Amalei B'Kiva, we quote in the Brayz, Rabbi Kiva responded to Rabbi Shmuel and said, wait a second. Hari Shabbos, and then by Shabbos, and Shabbos says Moshavos. V'Amalei, and he says, don't bring me right from Shabbos. Shabbos Kabachemhi. What do you mean? Amalei, why couldn't you just answer him simply? I'm not Bia Moshav Kamina. Shabbos only said Moshe V'seichem, doesn't say Bia Moshavos. You just told me Rabbi Shmuel's halacha was by both. So the Gemara, you're right. It's one and another that he was telling him. First of all, that no Bia Moshav Kamina. First of all, you should know that don't ask me from Shabbos. Shabbos only said Moshe V'seichem. I'm saying when it says Bia and Moshe. And Shabbos, and this that you're saying, Shabbos is my Shabbos. Even if it was also the same, Shabbos Kabochem, it's coming from a Kabochem. Okay, now here it gets a little bit complex. But my Kamiflagi, what is the machlokes, as Rashi explains and Tosfos supports that idea? The question is really under Kiva. Why didn't he learn like Bishmol? Because it says about Bia and Moshav, which is coming into Eretz Yisrael and settling it. Why doesn't he say La'acher Yerusha b'yeshiva? He's not asking the question the other way because Rabbi Shmuel couldn't learn like Rabbi Kiva because he says Lachem has to be Bama Hanaeges Bakulcham, which is it can't be B'chal Makom Shad Yeshin. It has to be Bama Sibur. But Rabbi Kiva, why does he disagree with Rabbi Shmuel? Says the Gemara, the Machlekes is B'kiva Nesachim B'mid B'kamevagim. Interesting. It's about did they bring the libations in the desert? Shmuel Sabah he holds B'kiva Nesachim B'midbar. They did not bring Nesachim in the Midbar. So As Rashi points out, even though by the Miluim, which was in the Midbar, when they inaugurated the Mishkan, the pasuk says in Shmos Chavtes V'Zash Tasam Mazbech Dishdu Duram Mazbech, and it says within the Sachim by the Olas Tamid. Says Rashi, that's by Korban Tzibur. But individuals were not obligated in the Sachim only from when they came into Eretz Yisrael and onwards after Yerusha the Yeshiva. So that's what the pasuk's telling us. But it says that's he translates Moish V'Seichem is Lachar Yerusha Yeshiva. That's the pasuk he's saying because in the midbar they didn't have it. But Rabbi Kiva Savar, Kiva Nasachim. No, individuals did sacrifice libation by midbar in the midbar when it was already brought for the tzibur. So therefore, obviously, if you're going to require Nasachim for a large altar for the Bama Gedayla, I don't need a pasuk because they already had that. And there, here when it says in the pasuk Bia Kisavayu, it's only being mentioned only because of an individual's Bama, which was permitted for them when they came to Gilgal all those 14 years. And the pasuk, okay, that requires Nasachim, but that's B'chol Makom Shad Yeshvim, because you can't be telling me that it's coming to say that by the Bama Sibur, the way Shmuel is, because what do you mean Bama Sibur? They always had Nesachim by Bama Sibur, even the Midbar. So you can't say Kesava is coming to include that. It must be included the Bama Yachid, and therefore that's the Machlek is dependent on if they had the Nesachim in the Midbar or not. So Abaye says that Haitan Rabbi Shmuel, which we translated before, we originally thought it was one way, but he says it's this that he has the halacha of Yerusha, L'ach Yerusha B'Yeshiva, only after they inherit and settle is only where it says the word Moish V'Seichem with the word Kisavayu is actually Mapik Me'idach Tan Rabbi Shmuel. It's actually is coming to exclude from a different Tana who he was in the Yeshiva Rabbi Shmuel, and he said no, even when it only says the word Bia itself coming in is only after Yerusha B'Yeshiva, even without the word Moish V'Seichem. The Tan Rabbi Shmuel, a different Bryce Yeshiva Rabbi Shmuel said like this. Since it says in the Torah many times, unspecifically, Kisavayu, Yikiyabayacho, and talks about coming into Eretz Yisrael. And one of them specified and told us it's La'acha Yerusha B'Yeshiva, it's after that you inherit and you sell the land. Which one is that? It says Rashi, that's regarding when it talks about making a king. Plus in Varm Yadzayin says Kisavayu La'achas, and come to the land, V'yirashta v'yishavta ba, and V'amarta Simalai Melech, I'm going to make a king, and it talks about there explicitly after inheriting and settling the land. So I've called Ach Yerusha B'Yeshiva. Every time it says coming to Eretz Yisrael, since it was Sasam and one place it was Mefurish, is also only after Yerusha B'Yeshiva. So you see, in this Tana, it's just with the word Kiviyach is enough. You don't need also the word Moish V'Seichem. It says the Gemara V'Idach, but the Tana, the first Bryce of Rabbi Shmuel, which we brought before, he says no, you can't learn that from there. Because you have two psukim, Melech and Bikurim, because it says by Bikurim also Behoiki Sobei Ela Aretz, and it says they're also Yerusha and Yeshiva. There's Shnei Ksum Abam Ke'echad, two psukim teaching the same idea. Whenever you have two psukim teaching the same idea, you cannot learn out from there. And therefore, that's why it's only going to be when you have Moish V'Seichem and Bia. But the time of the second verse says, no, it's not true. Tzrich, you need them. It's not, and they're both not teaching the same idea. Why? Because the Ikas Rachmana Melech Lekas Bikurim, had we only said that of the king and not regarding Bikurim, meaning to say that's only Achi Yerusha B'Yeshiva, I would have said to say, yeah, Bikurim the Kabasani, Bikurim that you get pleasure from the altar, you'd be chayvin right away. So I wouldn't have known that's Achi Yerusha B'Yeshiva. Because of Bikurim Lekas Melech, and it said only regarding the first words, not regarding Melech, that it's only Achi Yerusha B'Yeshiva, I would have said to say, yeah. Only maybe Bikurim you have to wait 14 years. But Melech, the Dark Lekabish, the king, that the way he conquers the land, they should appoint the king La'alta right away so that he could, that's the whole point of 14 years when they're conquering the land. So therefore you needed both, and then that's not Shnei Ksum Abam Ke'echad, and you could learn that from there. But V'idach, the time the first price said, no. The king, the Torah should have written king, and that it requires after 14 years, and they would not have to write Bikurim. No, I would say Imam Melech Lekabish if regarding appointing the king, which he's the one that conquered, and still it's only Achi Yerusha B'Yeshiva. It's only after that you inherit and that you sell the land. Bikurim Lekoshkin, Bikurim isn't it all the more so, and therefore it is going to be extra, and therefore you don't have to say both, and therefore you cannot learn out from that. But the Idach, the time the second brace, it says no, because of Achad, you written like that. Havamina, I would have thought that they say it's not true. Even though king you would think it's a Kavachaymer, but I would say that maybe it's not true. Maybe it would apply right away by Bikurim. Because midav chala, the halach of chala, everyone agrees. Right when the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, they're obligated chala right away. Like it says in Mamid B'Tetzvav B'Vayachim, which a Sifri teaches in Pasha Shlach L'cha, that it's different the way it says this coming in from all the times it says coming to Eretz Yisrael. Because it usually says Kibiyacha, Kisavayu. Here it says B'Vayachim, which sounds like right when they came in they were obligated. So true, but chala and bikurim are similar. That they're from the first things that you bring. So you would have thought actually you would be chayv right away. Kamashman, that's what you have to say. both of them, and therefore it's not extra, and therefore it's not shnei ksuma, meaning it's not shnei ksuma of keach, and therefore you could learn that from there. Okay, Akabam, that's a machlekes between these two brayos of Rabbi Shmuel. Now the Gemara just concludes the discussion of the Mishnah. Now that you said that if it's a personal obligation, no heges bein be'eretz Yisrael bein b'chutzlaretz applies in Eretz Yisrael chutzlaretz. So Moshev because Rachmana gabe Shabbos lamali. Then why does it say Moshev by Shabbos? Since it's a chayvus aguf, obviously applies. Meaning, if you learn Moshev means b'chol ma'shveiseichem wherever you live. So why do you need to say by Shabbos? Of course. Says the Gemara, Itzach, no, you had to say Sukkot. I mean, you would have thought to say Shabbos is written in the context of the Yom Tovim, so the verb to buy Kiddush, which required the Kiddush Bezdin, like the Yom Tovim. Now the thing is, as Rashi points out, the Kiddush HaChaydish was only in Judea and not B'chol Moshe V'Seichem, as the Gemara says on the end of Yerav and Beis, called Drisha Shat Dedosh Yibah Shechna Shal Malkum, which has to be in by Yerushalayim. So therefore, you would have thought to say that Shabbos cannot be wherever it is; it has to require in Eretz Yisrael the Kiddush. That's why they say no b'chol moshe v'seichem. Says the Gemara similarly, Moshe the Kosher Achmani gabe chaylev adam. Why by the issur of eating forbidden fats or blood, where it's a chayvus agov? It says in the Torah chukas oil moderisechem b'chol moshe v'seichem kol chayil b'chol dam l'sechelu. Well, normally, why does it have to be b'chol moshe v'seichem? Of course, the chayvus agov. Says the Gemara, Itzach was necessary. So when you would have thought to say the carbon to be written in the context of the carbonos. That's where it's written. Bisman de carbon nitzach chayil b'dam. You would think, okay, when there's carbon, then chayil b'dam is forbidden. Bisman de like a carbon, when there's no carbon, it's not. Kamashmal, that's no b'chol moshe v'seichem. So the Gemara says one more. Moshe the chas of Rachman gabe matzah mar lamali. Why when it talks about matzah mar, which it says b'chol moshe v'seichem decham matzah? Of course, it's a chayvus aguf. It's nothing to do with the eretz. Why would I have to say b'chol moshe v'seichem? It says itzach is necessary. So when you would have thought the Helbek Sibison says in Bamidbar al matzah maram yechlu, that way you have to eat the carbon pesach on matzah and mar. I would think to say bisman dika pesach, and when there's a carbon pesach, yes. Bisman like a pesach loy then not. Kamashwan, so you have to say moshe zeichem b'chol moshe yeshim. And then one last one, be the kosher achman gabe tefillin the petach amar lamali. Why does it mention this v'hoyu kibiyacha, which we said according to that Tan Rabbi Shmuel? We're saying, well, actually not that one, but why does it say bia? But it's not saying it's not totally ba'aretz. It's not going to be only in Eretz Yisrael. So why does it say that by tefillin petach hamor if it's not going to say it's only in Eretz Yisrael? So the Gemara, Rabbi Shloimy to teach you something else. I say mitzvah zu, do this mitzvah of tefillin petach hamor shebeshvila tekanes la'aretz. And because of it, you're going to go into Eretz Yisrael. It's going to be the reward, but it's not totally ba'aretz. And that's why it says like kibiyacha to say that you're going to be zoicha to go into Yisrael if you keep this mitzvah. Thank you to any time.